previously I'd never met anyone who was interested in the man.
What is the most memorable conversation that you've had about James Joyce?
Well, the most memorable conversation, um, probably with you, which was, I think, our first conversation, because previously I'd never met anyone who was interested in the man, which is maybe a terrible thing to say, but I've always heard about Ulysses. Obviously, I didn't even know the names of his other works, and Ulysses was the only thing I knew of his, and it was always talked about as like this behemoth that, oh, you have to read just for the sake of reading because it was one of the great texts, but not because it was a good, enjoyable text that was there. So I think the most memorable would be the first time we were all talking about our research interests, and you were like, I actually love James Joyce's writing. And I was like, wow, that's a first for me. And then it opened up all these new books and new ways of looking at stuff. So yeah.
Okay, so then uh so I feel like then sort of us talking about our research interests was this bit of like a moment where you changed from like preconceptions of Joyce to maybe like new ideas. So then I guess could you just describe a little bit more to me like what those preconceptions of Joyce were, like where they came from? Like, I don't know, was it like professors who were describing Joyce as really difficult, or?
Yeah, it was definitely professors didn't even mention Joyce. So the university that I went to, we didn't really have the classes weren't period-wise classes, which I think is really common here. They were more thematic that was there. So all of the courses that I took weren't ever even, it's strange. I did a course on modernism, but it was mainly modernist poetry, and it was mainly modernism as an abstract concept in and of itself, rather than, looking at famous modernist writers that were there. But we didn't even mention Joyce in that class, which is now strange to me, but back then was like really normal because he was treated as like this figure that was like, again, like the kind of dead figure already. That it was great to study if you were studying literature like in the 50s, or you were studying literature long ago, right? But right now, everyone was looking at other modernist writers or other avenues if they were interested in modernism at all. That was there. So it was really only coming to McGill in my graduate program that I was even looked at. Even something like, because it wasn't just Joyce, I was equating Joyce at the same level as I would equate like medieval studies. And I would equate this thing, even though like the time periods are so different and like medieval studies are so much more further. It was treated as like, I was like, oh, none of my peers are going to be interested in analyzing this or in analyzing that. And that really, because now we have also Elizabeth who's studying archival work that's there, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the only exception to that would have been like the Shakespeare train, but that's because I think Shakespeare is so canonized in in all English departments that regardless of where you do your undergrad or where you study English, you'll always be learning some Shakespeare at all. Whereas I feel like as big as Joyce is, that's not necessarily the case for him. But there was really the notions that I had of Joyce were just from like other, like maybe the secondary articles that we were assigned for the modernist class that would maybe reference like Joyce and Mrs. Dalloway, etc. And we'd be talking about that. But it was always in secondary texts. It was never as a primary text, which is interesting.
That is really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, I don't know, I kind of experienced him the opposite way. I was talking about like this this morning where like in my sort of like in the like opening years of undergrad, it was almost like the modernists were this like gauntlet that you had to go through to like prove that you were committed to literary studies. It's like, get through Dubliners and then we'll take you seriously.
Interesting.
I don't know. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
they felt very, I don't know, like canonical to me. But I think that's also where like we kind of ended up with the same like conception of him as this like impossible to read, even though people were treating him very differently for us. Who is James Joyce now to you?
Oh my God. I mean, again, like I feel like I still don't know much about the man. I still haven't done any like exploration on my own. So all my knowledge of who James Joyce is as a person has come from like our discussions, like our previous discussions that have been there.
Mhm.
So James Joyce is a man to me. I would say he still occupies that position of an author that I consider to be not, I don't want to use the term outdated that's there, but the author who was big in his heyday or was big a long time ago and therefore has been canonized, but is not so much focused on today that's there. So he still occupies that position for me, but he's no longer like completely dead. He's no longer completely, yeah, that aspect is gone because I do know, so I think it's like slowly chipping away at it. And it is interesting because when I thought of his writing also, I thought of it as very much on brand with the whole um, Straight White Man saga that you have. So a lot of times I was skeptical of how much depth his work would have or how much this thing there. But then, for example, while reading Ulysses and looking at like our conversations about the revolutionary undertones of being set in Ireland, of him being Irish and his own grappling with religion that you see in the novel that's there. Like those have been the parts that have like made me most interested about Joyce as a man that's there.
So you've read, well, I know we're like in the Ulysses book club together, so I know you've read about half of Ulysses.
Yeah, I'm a little behind on the reading.
That's okay. Yeah. That's okay. We are in a time of shifting the reading plan, and I think it's good that we are. But is there any else of his work that you've read or maybe like tried to read and given up on, or you'll never read?
Literally nothing. So the reason I even like joined the book club in the first place is because I knew that if I tried to do it by myself, it would be the kind of book that I would put down and I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna get back to this because I want to read it, and then I would just never finish it. So having the book club is like a good way of getting through Ulysses. But one of the things that is definitely on my list is Dubliners, just purely also because I know that it's a collection of short stories. It's a lot more easy to get through 2-3 stories and then be like, okay, when I come back, I don't have to do all of this. I don't have to have remembered all of these things about it because you're starting a new story that's there. So I think that'll be a lot easier for me to get through when I do pick it up. But apart from having Dubliners on my to read list, I don't really know what my future engagement with Joyce, what else would fall under my future engagement with Joyce. I feel like as I am currently, I think, enjoying our discussions of his writing more than I'm enjoying the reading of it, if that makes sense.
For sure.
So I'm interested to see then how, when it's a lot more of a compact story, if it's a lot shorter story that's there, how that's gonna, maybe I prefer his short stories as compared to like this long novel, like in terms of that. But I'm gonna read Dubliners and then I think take a call on how much more engagement I'm gonna have with him in the future.
Sounds good. I like that. I like that. So you described Ulysses a couple times as a long novel. Probably not to your surprise, its status as a novel has been brought into question by quite a few people. So I guess I would just ask, like, what is Ulysses? Like, from your understanding of it so far, like through your preconceptions of it, through your reading of it, like, is it a novel? Is it like a specific subset type of novel, or like a novel with an asterisk? Or
I I would consider it a novel. Like I do
Okay.
think it fits all of the like if someone like again like when you talk about it like it's a almost it wasn't like a deliberate use of me being like this is a novel, let me deliberately say novel. It
Hmm.
was rather like oh yeah, this is like a substitute for like for book in that sense when
Hmm.
I was talking about it like that.
Hmm.
So I definitely never had any of that, but if I was asked to do that elevator pitch, I would describe it as a novel,
Okay.
definitely. When I was there, I would describe it as very fitting novel, but definitely one with very unique and interesting. I would talk about the form a lot in
Okay.
terms of the use of um, is the stream of consciousness that he does throughout the
Okay.
novel that's there, because I found that to be really interesting. What I do think is unfortunate for me, that what I do find really interesting is that I don't know the story of Odysseus by heart. Like I know the general gist of the story, but like for the what I'm interested in, because the edition that I have doesn't name the sections,
Hmm.
doesn't name the chapters that are there. And I find it very interesting that obviously it follows like Odysseus's path, right? So the
Hmm.
chapters are named after like either conflicts or interactions that happen that like mirror his journey that's
Hmm.
there. So like the Scylla and Charybdis, or like the Wandering Isles, etc., mirror like the conflicts that are taking place in the novel, much
Hmm.
like the conflicts that he was dealing with the monsters um, in the ocean, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
And that is definitely something that drew me in to wanting to read the novel in the first place, because I had like a big, I think we all had like, our generation had like that Greek mythology phase as a kid growing up
Yes.
that was there.
Shout out to
And
Rick
so having that,
Riordan.
exactly, exactly. So having that connect was really something that made me more keen to read the novel in the first place. Again, because I knew nothing of Ulysses before reading it. I just knew it was this very complicated modernist novel that everyone had difficulty reading, and it was loosely based on the story about the Odyssey, of the
Hmm.
journey. Um, so I feel like that was definitely something, and that's also a reason that I think I enjoy our discussions more, is that plotting it against the story I find to be a lot more interesting, maybe, than
Hmm.
like the actual text in and of itself.
I think it's very rare that anyone gets into Joyce like because they like sat down with Ulysses of their own volition and were like, yeah, this is fun. Like, how have you like come across Joyce, I guess, in the world outside of his text?
I will say, unfortunately, there was literally no connect. I had no, I don't know if it was just me being like unobservant or if it just didn't catch my eye,
Hmm.
but Joyce just was never something that existed outside of the text.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like there was never any literary events growing up that I can remember connecting to Joyce. There were
Hmm.
never, even like, for example, I don't know why it surprised me, but when you were telling me about like the many different movie adaptations that have been made
Hmm.
for this thing, like it's one of the biggest novels in like the biggest texts in the world, like one of the most canonical. Of course, it's got a movie adaptation, but like that was surprising to me because I'd never heard of the adaptations that were
Okay.
there. So even it's like even though that's connected to the text in that like it's a film adaptation, that
Hmm.
was also something that was lost on me. I didn't even know Bloomsday. The like I didn't yeah, I had no idea about any of these things. Like this was all very new to me coming into this.
That's so cool. No, I think that that's really quite formidable then. You're reading
Yeah.
Ulysses now without any of that sort of like support on the side. I don't know. Even I had stuff like that. I hated Joyce the first time I just read it, but
I feel like some of my questions about Joyce will be brought up in the like the reading club that we have there,
mhm.
but I'm more interested like in this project
Okay.
or thing. Like what is the because I know it's for your public scholarship course that's there.
Hmm.
So I guess I wanted to know what exactly you were defining as your public and what exactly you were looking at, because I know you're looking at our engagement, like apart from you, the engagement that we have with Joyce, right?
Mhm.
Just generally that's there. So then what would you see this project then being? Is it like a stepping off point for more conversation with Joyce, or is it something else?
Yeah. Ooh. So I think, I mean, first of all, I think in the context of public scholarship, because Joyce sort of has this reputation that precedes him of like quite difficult and all of this stuff, I was very aware going into the public scholarship class that there have already been a lot of like I think some of them have done it really well, but they all end up to me seeming a little bit like paternalistic or condescending, like, oh, this work is so difficult, but if the people do want to read it, I as scholar will take it upon me to like explain. And I definitely think there are some public scholarship projects that like, yeah, have done that in like different ways. It's all cool. I think they're neat, but like a lot of them seemed like sort of the academy speaking out. And so I think it was important for me that my project wasn't just about me like share like talking from this like sort of privileged position of like, oh well, I'm a master's student studying Joyce, so you have to listen to me talk about Joyce. One thing that sort of like really got like where I got the idea of what I could do instead of that is actually like the title of the project is Not a Soul to Talk to About Bloom, which is actually something that James wrote he was like a little annoyed that none of his friends in wherever city he was living like didn't want to talk about Leopold Bloom with him. And so it kind of got me interested that like since the beginning, like since before it was even published, this book has been about having conversations about it, and that there is this like thing outside of the text. So in the context of like, okay, well, we want to have conversations about it, but I don't want it to be me like teaching and sort of like sharing my knowledge or whatever. I think I very much chose like as my public this sort of like Joyce fans. So that I can, and I mean, like you were probably like loosely defined as a Joyce fan, but these people who have very intimate relationships with Joyce, who honestly have like close read him and read him through these like just wild, you know what I mean? Like they're doing literary scholarship, and just because they're like fans, a lot of the times like I wouldn't have an opportunity to bring them into my work or to talk to them. So I think it's like I want not only an opportunity to talk to those people like in the conversations that I have in these like videos, but also that I think posting the videos and saying like anyone can watch them, but I'm sure that like it will mostly be Joyce fans, but that it creates this sort of like parasocial relationship where it's like it draws attention to the fact that these conversations happen all the time, but usually they're in such casual conversation that we don't even note them down, or we don't even think about them as like reflecting on Joyce, because talking about Bloom is just such this like ordinary, like taken for granted thing that people don't think to like keep track of it or note it down when it happens. So I'm doing that.
Right. No, but I like that. It's like a giving back to that small community that you're a part of, which I think is really
Yeah, I
nice.
think, and I think it's also been important for me to like recognize myself as a part of that community, because as much as I think we kind of get advice from professors of like, you don't really want to study something that you're a fan of because,
Mhm.
oh, like all the fan, there are certain assumptions about, what you'll focus on and that sort of thing. But I think it has been really like it's already been very I've gotten a lot of knowledge from the people that I've talked to, but also I think I've just been like justified in my like love and excitement for Joyce, and that like you can get to know the text very, very well, even as you're giddy about it, like it's okay. What you think to you will be memorable about this conversation, whether that is you'll go back and tell your roommates about how Shelby forced you to waste an hour or half an hour, or if there's some little like, you know, change in your opinion of Joyce studies that I don't know, what will stick out?
I think what may stick out is I've never actually thought of the, I've never contemplated Joyce outside of the text that's there.
Mm-hmm.
So even when you were mentioning my engagement of Joyce in the future, I was always thinking of my engagement with Joyce in the future solely in terms of reading his work, or solely in terms of treating him as an author that's there. So one thing that will definitely now change is that maybe considering different kinds of engagement that I can continue having with him, even if I only read Ulysses and Dubliners, or even if this thing like the other avenues that still exist to engage with, that I either haven't noticed or just haven't been accessible or in my periphery yet. So yeah, that's definitely something to look forward to, I guess.